Through the Gates is produced under the support of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management. That's our mission. We're engaged in fighting at every level so that wildlife management remains science-based and conservation continues to work for our wildlife. To learn more and join the movement, visit SaveTheHuntColorado.com. The North American model of wildlife conservation is the greatest conservation model in the world. It's a success story that should be shared and celebrated because everybody is a part of it. So we got another episode of Through the Gates podcast, Through the Gates to Save the Hunt. We've got Luke Wiedel, one of our board members for CRWM, and we wanted to discuss a little bit about the politics and the wildlife management side of politics that's going on, not just in Colorado, but what's happening throughout the western United States and even getting into Alaska. And Luke has been a board member for a long time at CRWM. He also volunteers for RMEF, lives in Denver, runs a fishing boat in Alaska part-time, has a plethora of kids under tow. That I think you're creating a basketball team or something.
I have one.
Yeah,
I already have one.
Yeah, you just got short basketball players. They'd be good jockeys on miniature horses right now. So, Luke, give us a little bit of rundown again. I think some people know who you are, but background, what you do, where you're at.
I grew up in Colorado. Lived in, just grew up outside of Boulder, and when I was 17, before I went to college, I kind of pursued a dream of fishing in Alaska. I always wanted to go, but didn't know what I was doing or what to do. So I just literally, I convinced my parents to allow me to buy a plane ticket and head up there. And I literally slept on somebody's couch for a night before I found a job fishing. And that was 25 years ago. I've been fishing Alaska for 25 years. I've done various things, but within different fisheries and throughout the state. But what I do to date and what I've done for a long time is run a charter fishing business in southeast Alaska. So, and then my wintertime is spent here with my wife and 5 children in Colorado on the Front Range. We live just outside of Denver, so we split our time between 2 places, which is challenging, but also pretty cool in a lot of ways. So,
how long were you doing that?
24 years, 25, I think.
And you got out of high school and went up there and decided to become a deck monkey or what?
Yeah, then I actually I got a job on a commercial salmon trawler, so a hook and line fishery all on the ocean. Primarily takes place in southeast Alaska for king salmon and silver salmon.
Kind of like Deadliest Catch stuff?
Not really, no.
Oh, no, not really, no.
But then I've also longline fished, crewed on bigger boats throughout the state, from the Canadian border out to the Aleutian Islands, and for black cod and halibut. So I know the commercial fisheries well, but what I do now is almost all guiding, but on the ocean in southeast.
So things have changed a lot over the course of the last 25 years of what, from when you started in Alaska to where it is now.
Yeah. We've seen changes for sure. There are some species that we target that are a little more, I don't know if they're more susceptible to all sorts of factors like environmental factors and various things, but also, but one thing has remained a constant, which is the complexity of management in Alaska. So wildlife management, when you add in native kind of variables and with subsistence and big kind of corporate commercial fisheries in terms of draggers and trawlers, which is
they're trying to feed the planet.
Yeah, it's So you add all that in there, and it's quite complex, and it's a huge business in Alaska, both on the tourist side, which is essentially what I do. We're bringing people to the state to enjoy and to also take some fish home with them, but it's much different and as it exists alongside commercial fisheries management.
So when you got into what made you do it? Were you a rebel? You were running from the law?
When I was a kid, I always wanted to go to Alaska to fish. I mean, like kids probably have no idea what I'm talking about today, but like you used to be able to go through catalogs, like
Oh, yeah.
whether it was a trapping catalog
Yeah.
or a Sears catalog or
Yeah.
whatever. And in the back, sometimes you'd have advertisements. So all different kinds of things. I mean, you could buy pocket knives or BB guns or
Learn how to raise muskrats.
Yeah, right,
I
right.
remember
So
all that stuff.
I was a junkie in terms of being able to buy, or in terms of being able to kind of like go into the back of these catalogs and
It was a whole one ads.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
3, 4, 5, 6 pages.
Yeah, we would. I remember buying like a how to get involved in commercial fishing in Alaska or something. So you literally like sent in this little form. You know, you'd cut it out of the magazine.
That's how Cabela's got started doing fishing flies.
Yeah.
You know, it was like 5 for $2 or whatever it was, and to the mega giant that they are with Bass Pro and Cabela's combined. But anybody that hasn't experienced that
right.
doesn't understand what we talk about. But that's the way we used to get it, because we didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet, you didn't have any computerization of anything. It was all through magazines and publications.
No smartphones.
No smartphones.
Yeah, so I mean, I cut out this little, form out of the magazine and sent them my name and address and paid, $5 in the form of a check or cash or money order, and they sent me back this video about finding a job on a seiner, like a net boat or a gill netter or something in Alaska. So I don't even remember really what was in that, but it was one of those VHS, plug it in and watch it and see how to become an Alaskan
And you already
fisherman.
packed your stuff,
But I mean, I was
took your
probably
deck
like
boots.
13 at the time, so I always had this dream out in front of me of like wanting to A, go to Alaska, but B, get involved in fishing in Alaska. And so when I was 17, I was in my last year of high school, or right before, and my parents, I can't believe they let me do that, but I did it right, and kind of then right before I went to college, and then at my age and the bills I needed to help kind of get me through college and all of that, I was making great money. Eventually, it took a couple years. The first year we can talk about that. That was an interesting year, but eventually found my way and kind of got settled into something that was actually a decent money making thing for me as a just not even 20 years old. And so I kept fishing and throughout college, and then I was like, well, I don't think I want to do anything else, so I'll keep going to school. So I went to grad school because I wanted to keep my summers open so I could fish, because I was making decent money and I didn't want to do anything else. So yeah, I mean, and at this point in my life, I've done it long enough. I mean, I still love it, but it's harder and harder for me personally.
Especially you got the kids.
Yeah, I mean,
you have a family.
Got a young family, so.
Your brothers did this too, didn't they?
Yeah, I have 5 younger brothers, and some of them have worked for me, but they've all worked in Alaska in various ways. So I've lined some up with deckhanding jobs and set netting jobs and troll jobs and longline jobs, and so yeah, they've all done it long enough to realize that they wanted a real job.
So they didn't want to do it forever.
Yeah.
And were you always based out of Sitka, or did you go all over the Southeast?
My business has always been in Sitka, in Southeast. And then when I was longline fishing in the springtime, before we would set up our charter fishing stuff in the summer, we would fish from the Canadian border out, way west of Kodiak into the Aleutians. So I've been all over the state fishing.
When did you get into the tourist side? When did you?
I always, it wasn't, but maybe a year, 2 years after I started doing it, I started dipping my toes in that. I realized it was much more kind of, if I got into it with my own business, I could be home at night. We're just doing day trips, although they're really long days, but we'd be home at night. And so that was appealing to me, especially as I started to have kids. So, so I've always done some form of guiding there. Mm-hmm.
Did your wife ever do it? Go with you on the boat?
Oh yeah. She used to love it. She could be out in rough stuff and didn't bother at all. But after having kids, she gets seasick, like really bad.
Really?
Oh man. like the water could be as calm as this table, and she would find a way to get sick.
So that's not appealing. She goes to Alaska during the summer now, and it's like, I'll stay on shore and maybe go out in the bay a little bit.
Poor thing. She can't even watch boats on TV right now, and she gets sick. Oh yeah, it's crazy. I got a little side story. So this summer, I had a day off. So like we bring groups in, and then there's sometimes a day where you have a turnover day and there's lots to do and maintenance to be done, and we got to get bait and make sure everything's working and so forth. But the family was there, so I said, well, this is cool. We'll take all 5 kids on the boat. I'll bring my deckhand with me because I'm going to need his help. The weather looks beautiful, and I know where these king salmon are schooled up pretty good, and we'll just be in and out. You know, Megan, my wife, she won't get sick because we'll do it fast. And we're non-residents, so we're residents at Colorado. So at the time, I think I could retain 1 king salmon per person, and a kid, in order to be able to retain it, has to actually be able to reel up the fish and do it all themselves. You know, you can't do it for them. So we had enough rods baited, and we were like an hour and a half from town, and so far so good. We watched some whales on the way and everything, and kids are all life jacketed up, and I told my deckhand, I said, we don't have long, so let's make it, let's make our time count.
Somebody's gonna get sick.
Somebody's gonna get sick, probably multiple people. So, and some of my kids are more into it than others, for sure. So we pull in, and I had fished here the day before, and at the end of the day, it was pretty fantastic fishing. I mean, big ocean schools of king salmon. So pull in there, and I could see it on the screen. You see this big wave of king salmon looking at the boat, and then they shoot back down to the bottom. So I'm like, okay, we're good. All the baits go in the water. Fish immediately hooked. I mean, we've got 3, 4, 5, 6 fish on at once, however many rods we're legally allowed to use, and everything is, I mean, I got my daughter on the front bow cranking when she's like 7, and she's cranking one in, and lines are snapping and things are going all wrong. And I mean, we probably hooked 20 fish. It was so cool, but we had 20-30 minutes. We kept what we were legally allowed to keep, and then I could see it. I mean, I'm walking around with like 2 kids in my arms trying to help kids do their thing, and my wife is sitting on the cooler. So I'm like, we got to go. So that day ended. I mean, the pictures look great. But
it's a good family shot.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, my wife, she can't. I mean, she just can't do it.
Really?
No.
And do any of the kids get sick?
Not really. Sometimes they'll get a little tired and yawny, but it's not. I mean,
Gabe should be
tough.
into it. I mean, yeah.
I have one son, and he is an animal, so he loves to fish. I mean, he won't. Every body of water he sees.
Really?
And we got into ice fishing this winter here in Colorado, which he's just. I mean, he lives for it. So it's cool to see. I mean, that's how I used to be.
That's how you got started, and just kind of got the bug. He doesn't have magazines to go through to look at any things at the back.
He just has YouTube. I mean, if he wants to see something, he's like, Dad, could you show me, this or that, or a tiger muskie, or a helicopter landing, or whatever.
How big were they boats or ships that you worked on commercially?
Well, my boat, the first boat I worked on was like a 40-foot live aboard trawler. Sometimes manned by one person. Sometimes those are sometimes that one captain does everything himself. There's autopilot. He can run gear. He can ice fish. He can cook himself dinner or whatever. Sometimes and oftentimes they have one deckhand. Those are called ice boats. So like those boats take on, it's not like ice you would buy at 7-Eleven. It's a salted ice. So it lasts. It's much like it stays cold for longer. And so those boats would take on ice, and they'd fish and deliver like a 5 or 6 day fish on the ocean. So that's what I did. And I was a deckhand on this boat. I think I lost money that year. So, but then some of the bigger trawlers will have freezers on board, and it's called FAS, or frozen at sea king salmon. And the idea being, or silver salmon, the idea being the quality it's the highest quality fish you could get because it's blast frozen. It's gutted and gilled and headed and blast frozen at sea at like minus 45 Fahrenheit. And so the product is preserved much more quickly. So those bigger boats will have, sometimes 2 deckhands because it's a lot more labor intensive. And they'll stay out till they can't pack any more fish, so they're full. And so I've done both of those things in the troll fishery. And then I've long lined on 50-some footer and a 65-footer steel boats. On those boats, there's usually one guy running everything, and then usually on those bigger boats, like 3 crew members, because if they don't have an auto baiter, you're baiting circle hooks, you're dealing with buoy line and ground line and baiting hooks and dealing with fish, and there's plenty to do. So, yeah.
So when I went up there with you, I guess we've been twice. Some of the great big giant ships you see. I mean, those big giant ones that.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Are they like cargo ships?
No,
or?
They were the big fishing ships. I mean,
probably could be seiners, like big wide things, or
yeah.
Seiners. There's length restrictions where they can't be too long. So I think like 58 feet. I think. And so those could have been seiners with a big net on the back, and they use a seine skiff to tow the net off the back up against the beach, and they purse in the bottom. Usually that's for, at least in Southeast, it's almost all pink salmon or chum salmon that they fish for.
Okay.
And believe it or not, even though they're big net fisheries, there's a very little bycatch, which is like not non-targeted species that are harmed or killed. So like that's mostly where we do it in Southeast, and I've never seined, but that's usually what they're targeting. Like when you see canned salmon at the store, that's usually almost always pink salmon. Yeah.
And so how have things changed? Let's say in the last 20 years, as an example, between the commercial side, the actually commercial side, the subsistence side, and the tourism side. I mean, are they at each other's throats at different levels for quotas or for harvest limits or whatever?
Yeah, that's where you see a lot of this complexity. So in some species are more create more complexity than others. And I think that where I'm at, there's international there are international treaties, especially with king salmon. So we're dealing with the states like California, Washington, Oregon, but also Canada and us. And so there's targets of what each sector has, what the troll fleet has, and what the sport fishing sector has. And as a guide, I'm under the umbrella of that sport fish total catch. So like in Southeast Alaska, we just increased it by 3%, but we have it was an 80-20 split. So the trollers would get 80% of the king salmon, we would get 20%. Now it's 77-23, and that decision is made on a more local level within the management of the treaties. But I think that decision comes around every few years by Board of Fish. So, and yes, that gets pretty heated. You've seen like early on in the early 2000s in Southeast, the charter sector experienced tremendous growth, and the whole industry kind of got out ahead of all the regulation and all the management, which was kind of well oiled for a long time. And so what that meant was all we did was we fell under the sport fishing regulations, but that's a problem because we're much kind of, more effective, bigger kind of as an industry than somebody in a canoe trying to catch king salmon, for dinner. So, so that was dealt with and continues to be dealt with. There's federal agencies. You've got NOAA, National Marine Fisheries, which falls under that, and then you've got state managed species as well. So you've got the intersection of federally managed species and state managed species, and then the international dimension. And then out west, in particular, you have subsistence interests, where you have like the Kuskokwim River or any one of these giant river systems, where if you go upriver, there's entire populations of native peoples that rely on whether it's chum salmon, king salmon, silver salmon for food. And so you have that, and then you've also got a tremendous amount of complexity surrounding bigger industries like the trawlers, like midwater trawlers that trawl for pollock, or bottom trawlers that you know cod. I mean, there's and that's big business. Those are big factory boats, and that's where you see a lot more contention and heated kind of arguments, so to speak, between those different user groups, because in those trawl fisheries, there's a lot of bycatch, for instance. So, and there is speculation about what that's done to certain runs of chum salmon or king salmon, especially out west, as I mentioned before, where you have a big population of native Alaskans that are relying on king salmon, chum salmon for subsistence.
Do the native populations or the resident Alaskans have seasons that they can harvest, or is it?
Yeah. So, like where I'm at, yes, residents are allowed. If it's a state managed fishery, they can differentiate between a resident or a non-resident. In the federally managed fisheries like halibut, they don't do that. They do it differently. But yeah, so like if we were alongside each other fishing for king salmon in spring in Southeast Alaska, that varies every year. It differs every year with what the regulations put out are. But typically residents are allowed a more liberal annual limit or daily annual limit of king salmon, whereas non-residents are more restricted in those state-managed fisheries.
When I was there, I picked up some literature. It's pretty complex as far as, I mean, I could go fishing on my own, but you're supposed to be the guider of the light when it comes to regulations and rules and stuff, because what I looked at, it's hard for people to differentiate. Okay, how do I qualify for this, or what does this qualify, or is this apply to me, or does it not apply to me? I want to connect some of the similarities between what Alaska does and what other states do. Now we're talking fish versus fish and wildlife to start with, but Alaska is complex because of the commercialization, because of the subsistence, because of the tourism. We don't have the subsistence side of things. You know, people in the lower 48 say, well, I hunt for meat. Well, you might, but there's not a subsistence component to it like there is in other places like Alaska or some of the Canadian provinces.
And just to put that in context, that's a really good point, because when I say subsistence, I don't mean like at my house we eat deer, elk, fish. We rarely buy meat, but we still could very easily. I'm talking about places that exist that literally, I mean, people don't understand that is like, they rely on that, whether it's caribou, moose, fish. I mean, it is like 90-some%
that is their whole
their
foods.
diet.
That is the city market.
Yeah. I mean, real subsistence.
And so the commercialized stuff, is that only big production, or is that small commercialization? I mean, are boats your size out there doing commercial fishing?
Yes, but it's not. That's very, very different than the big business factory trawlers that are, that have tons of issues with bycatch and things like that. Like, for instance, the boat I told you I worked on initially, the trawler, there's very, very little bycatch involved in that. When you're targeting salmon, you're catching salmon. And so it's not like, you're not trawling up 1 million pounds of halibut that is caught and as bycatch and simply destroyed or anything like that. I mean, there's very little bycatch in something like that. So yes, there's a whole bunch of different types of commercial fisheries, but where I'm at in Southeast, it's mostly small boat stuff. When I say small boat, I don't mean
dinghies.
Yeah. I'm trying to point out the difference between hundreds of foot long factory trawler and a Southeast Alaska, 40-foot family run operation,
Because how big is your boat?
My boat's 32 feet. It's an aluminum boat, walk around, but that's a different animal. Yeah.
And most of the guys that are in your league that are commercial fishing are catching a variety of different species of fish, but then they go into the harbor and then turn around and dump it off and sell it, or they have to have it processed and then sell it, or what?
There's quota fisheries there's a variety of different commercial fisheries within those categories that I explained, but you have quota fisheries like the king salmon, like the salmon troll fishery. That's a quota fishery because you have to have a permit to do that, and there's only so many permits. They're transferable permits, whether they're power troll permits or hand troll permits, and you participate where there's openers in various places or on a coastal wide opener like the king salmon opener often is in July. And then once that quota is caught, they shut the whole thing down, or a percentage of that quota is caught, then they shut the whole thing down. And then they'll reassess, they'll do an accurate count, and they'll open it up to try and harvest the remaining, call it 30% of the king salmon quota later in the season, when those trollers are now targeting both silvers, and when they open kings for the second time, then kings. So it's kind of complex. But that's called a quota fishery. And so if you wanted to buy a power troll permit and go to Alaska and do that, you would have to buy a permit that's listed for sale on the open market.
Okay.
There's not just an endless number of them issued.
And there's probably a bunch of other people out there that would want to buy that.
Maybe. I mean, It depends on the year. A lot of it follows the price of salmon, the price of king salmon, and even abundance of the resource at that time. There are other fisheries, and that's what that. By the way, you mentioned the deadliest catch. That used to be a quota fishery, so those boats would have a permit, and they would go fish the openers, and that's why it was so dangerous. Because if in the days when it was managed as a quota fishery, you would have guys fishing no matter what. I mean, if it was a hurricane, you'd go fishing. Whereas now they've taken that total quota and they've broken it up into privatized kind of transferable rights within the fishery based on kind of a history of what's been landed by that individual fisherman, or each like a history of years. They would say, okay, Dan Gates has harvested this much king crab over the last decade, and here's what we're going to assign to him as his quota. And so what that did was it made the fishery safer, probably better management for the resource, and it also spread out to a certain extent when that product hits the market. So you could kind of sustain more valuable, more quality products kind of over time, as opposed to when those guys were out crab fishing, they would put whatever they could in their hold, and quality was not more important than production, than getting what you could get within a 48-hour opener, because they would open it for small chunks of time. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But you explaining it, it's not like, oh, I'm just going fishing.
Yeah, it's not. You can't just go fishing.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Just get your rod and your reel and your bobber and turn around and go out and go fishing. It's much more complex, especially from the big stuff all the way down. But you as a tourism charter captain, you're regulated significantly as well about harvest, about accountability. And explain a little bit of that. Is there any difference between when you open up to or when you close in the year, as far as when the seasons are and how those seasons fluctuate as far as quotas and or harvest limits?
Yeah, let me first say that also, as I explained in the crab fishery out west and in the Bering Sea, our ground fish are now managed like that too. So like halibut and black cod. Yeah. So there's individual quota owners, and that did a lot for the quality of the product, but also for the management of the fishery. What I do, there's no state. I don't have a state. I have a guide and business owner permit, so I'm a licensed guide. But I also have to have on the federal side what's called a CHP, a charter halibut permit. And they're similar to what I was saying with the quota system. There's only so many of those out there, and so there's some transferables and some non-transferables, because when they were all issued, they issued them with that distinction. Some non-transferables, when you stop operating or you die, that permit goes away. So I own a charter halibut permit, which allows me to harvest, and this is all regulated on the federal side, harvest halibut within the regulations set for that year for clients or with clients. So in other words, like, you can't, all that permit does is allow you to harvest within the regulations. So those regulations change too. So and that's managed differently than a state managed resource like salmon. So yeah, it's complex, and there's like I said, federal levels, state levels. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. You just went through some regulation changes.
Yeah,
Well, just recently.
We usually get our. Are you talking about king salmon? Maybe.
Yeah.
We get our king salmon regs, and then that distinction between what the resident is allowed and the non-resident, et cetera. We get those regs in April usually, and we have what's called in-season management. So, if we're getting 23% of the quota, if Fish and Game thinks that, okay, based on, and I log everything that gets caught every day, so they have the data, and as that number approaches what we're allowed to harvest on the upper end, they can shut us down any day with what's called an EO, an emergency order, and that's done overnight, usually with a couple days warning, maybe.
And correct me if I'm wrong, not to interrupt, but what you log, for the most part, on the tourism side of it, then is logged in when you have it processed to show how many you took in, or how many they actually took from you. So there's some accountability as far as, it's not like you're just hiding stuff. I mean, it'd be really difficult to turn around and hide what you got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a transfer form when it goes off the boat and goes to legally. You have to have a transfer form that goes with that fish because it's somebody else's fish. It's harvested by a client of mine or whatever. I also I can't fish or retain fish while I'm on board with clients. So, like, even though I have to have a license, I have to have a charter halibut permit, which a charter halibut permit is not just a piece of paper that costs $50. I mean, these things are trading for quite a bit of money, really. So it's not. I mean, if any of the listeners out there want to get rich, don't go into fishing. Don't do it. But yeah, a lot of regulation, a lot of kind of continuous in-season observance of what's happening with harvest in our sector and the troll sector, and this year we have the abundance. There's a number that calculates coastal, like not just statewide, but like coast-wide abundance, and in particular king salmon. And when I say that, a king salmon is usually a 5-year fish, 4 or 5 year fish, whereas some of the other salmon are like 2-year fish. So they're not as resilient as some of the other salmon species, the silvers, the sockeyes, chums, and so forth. And so that there's a lot more complexity around managing king salmon in an environment where you have, like I said, you've got international treaties, environmental factors, which have made things tougher. Some speculate, and so they're just not as resilient of a fish. This year, our abundance index is low, and I've never seen regulations like we have. But probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, those regulations came out. And a non-resident can only harvest 1 king salmon annually, and we're used to like 1 a day, 3 annually would be a really normal regulation. But in this case, I mean, we got May and June booked, and each non-resident can take home 1 king salmon. Now, luckily, we're doing a lot of other things, and I have clients who have been with us for literally decades and have never missed a year. So, but the regulations respond to that abundance index, that coast-wide number. And this year we're seeing low abundance index, and the regulations show it. So,
and is that to preserve the quality or the quantity?
Quantity, yeah.
Quantity more than anything.
Yeah. Within those regulations, there's always a spec. You can only, there's a size limit. You can't harvest a 26-inch king, for instance. And some of different states have different regulations, but in Alaska, it's almost always a 28-inch fish or bigger. And so, you've got like regulation within regulation within regulation within regulation. There's different, it's complex.
So what's a good sized king where you would catch them?
I don't know what the average number is, and then you have dressed weight versus live weight, because I'm kind of in my mind used to measuring by dressed weight, which is what the trollers measure by. But if somebody catches
a 38-inch king salmon, is that a big?
That's a big fish.
That's a big fish.
Mm-hmm.
So you see all these big giant pictures and stuff from mounts that people have accumulated, or reproductions they've accumulated over the years. Are those days gone, or are they different of the big giant mountable fish?
I mean, I'm not qualified to answer that question like a biologist might be. And even then, if there's so many different factors that somebody who's trying to scientifically approach that question would probably have, much like our biologists at CPW here in Colorado, I think there could be 6, 8, 10 theories about that. Mm-hmm. What I've seen in my experience is our king salmon have gotten smaller. We have, I used to fish 110 days a year targeting salmon and groundfish, halibut, that sort of thing. So I still see it all. I still see big fish. I still see giant schools of fish. I still see everything that you could possibly imagine. And I still see days where we troll for hours or fish for hours without a bite. So I see it all, but my sample size is zoomed out. It's much greater than somebody who would go fishing for 2 or 3 days.
Right.
But yeah, our king salmon have generally gotten smaller. I mean, there's speculations from environmental factors, temperature of oceans, all the way down to like food source, as how we target and how we, on the commercial end of things, how we harvest their food source, which is herring, which is big industry too. Mm-hmm. And so somebody to respond to that question would have somebody that's smart and approaching it in the right way would say, I don't know, but it could be one of these 10 things. It almost is never associated, though, with management in terms of overharvest, is my understanding. In other words, these are the most sustainable fisheries on Earth, more than likely. And the factors, while they might include bycatch from out in the Gulf when the big factory trawlers are targeting pollock and so forth, I mean, there's tens and tens and tens of thousands of king salmon that are caught that are then destroyed. So when I say overharvest, I mean in our sector or in Southeast Alaska, in the troll sector. That's very different than what's happening with I guess you could call it overharvest with bycatch in fisheries where they're not targeting that species, but it's still affected or destroyed.
You get on some of the rivers, though. That's a different fishing experience than it is what you're doing or what the open water is. When those guys are, I mean, you see videos, which I've never done it, but you see videos of guys, trying to, fish with rods on the rivers. Mm-hmm. That's different than what you're doing, but that's as they're migrating through to the spawn, correct?
Yeah. So like I said, a king salmon is spawning after several years in the ocean, whereas a pink salmon is, I think, a 2-year fish or something. So there's the turnarounds much more quickly. And you see swings in those fisheries too. I mean, some years where we're targeting silvers in Southeast, which is later in the season, we'll have unbelievable banner silver runs. And then some years it's a little slower. And then some years it's somewhere in between. And some years it comes in waves, waves of fish hit the beach and it's incredible. But yeah, they all migrate upstreams, up bigger river systems. King salmon, usually bigger river systems. Mm-hmm. And that's where they're having a lot of pretty troubling problems with their returns is out west, where, again, this is speculation on my part, but there's a lot of institutional or scientific speculation about what the bycatch is doing in those bigger operations, those bigger fisheries, the more commercial factory trawlers, where there's quite a bit of legitimate speculation that that's affecting some of those river systems, which I mentioned before. Some people rely heavily on for subsistence, especially with chum salmon and king salmon.
What do you like to eat?
King salmon. That's the best food on Earth if it's cooked right.
What about halibut?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
I mean, most people would that would be their preference. I think it's a halibut's a mild fish. It's easy. It's forgiving, and it's versatile. It could be used in enchiladas, or you could just eat it plain.
And cod.
Yeah,
I like the cod.
You like cod?
Yeah,
lingcod.
Yeah, I thought lingcod was really
lingcod's good. Yeah,
I thought lingcod was really good. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what it was, until we caught one and bring it up and go, what the hell is that?
Yeah. But each one of these fish you mentioned, I mean, in my head, I'm going, oh yeah, lingcod this year is open until June 15th. Then it shuts down until August 15th. A slot limit fish or a legal fish, when you're talking about lingcod for a non-resident, is one a year. between 30 and 35 inches. There's also a carve out in the regulations that allows you actually to harvest a second fish annually if it's over 55 inches. And in 25 years of doing this, I've caught, some days you'll catch 8 or 10 big lingcod. They're big female breeders that are as big as this table almost.
Mm-hmm.
They look like it. And you'll with care bring it up and try to measure it, and it's 51 inches. I've never caught a lingcod that's 55 inches.
Really?
No.
If you do, you can keep it.
You can.
Yeah.
I don't think I would.
Yeah. But
they're cool fish.
So like when we went with you, and maybe this is, but you're explaining some of the complexities. Between this length and this length, between this date and this date, but then it opens up again. So you might hit the trifecta and be there at the right time when everything just all the stars align. Mm-hmm. But when people are coming up, they're pretty much going halibut fishing or they're going salmon fishing, and they get some of the other stuff is incidental take. It's additive is what it is.
And we where we're at in our proximity to the ocean and everything. We combo fish almost every day. Sometimes not due to weather, but generally we're bottom fishing and salmon fishing in the same day.
And from what I experienced, to the person that doesn't know, and anybody that listens to this who's a big fisherman might understand. But how deep were we fishing off on the deep stuff that we were out there
when we were halibut fishing?
Yeah.
Probably like 60 fathoms of water, so like 350 feet-ish.
But then we also went into some shallows to be king salmon, which was, maybe 15, 20 feet.
Yeah, you're sometimes fishing that shallow, or you're fishing, depends on time of year and what's happening, and if there's ocean schools versus what they're eating. Are they eating needlefish or krill or squid? Are they eating herring balls, that... But yeah, an average, I'd say, fishing 80 to 200 feet of water for king salmon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or silvers.
And there was times that we had, 8, 10, 12, 200 boats within it seemed like it was just like being at an 11-mile reservoir anywhere else. So once people found stuff biting, everybody was in the same spot.
Yeah, sometimes that does happen.
Because they knew that that's where they were going to be, or they all turn around and just generally figured out they just follow everybody else.
A lot of the latter. A lot of times people follow, if you see like 15 boats kind of in one area, and you don't really know what to do, then you end up there,
Yeah, along with everybody else.
It starts some fights once in a while.
Yeah. If you want to support a company that supported the efforts to defeat Proposition 127, then you need to support Davis Tent. Davis Tent has provided quality canvas goods for outdoorsmen for the last 50-plus years. For more information, go to davistent.com. If you want to support another business that was instrumental in helping us defeat Proposition 127, check out Salida Gun Shop. Salida Gun Shop in Salida, Colorado provides quality products, expertise, and knowledge from individuals that actually do what they sell. Go to salidagunshop.com. Listen to the advice of Cameron Haynes and support companies that are supporting your cause and your efforts. Minturn Anglers is one of those companies. Minturn Anglers provides product and fishing excursions in Colorado and are second to none. For more information, go to minturnanglers.com. So, what do you like about it now compared to what it used to be? Is it starting to get old and trying on your old body and your mind and your soul with the family and everything else? Or if you could continue to fish for the rest of your life and make a good living at it, would you do it?
Yeah, but I also, I'm in my 40s and, my family, I wasn't born into a fishing family. Sometimes you'll see that where you have a real, 3, 4, even more generations of people who like, that's what you're going to do, and there's really no question. For me, I still love it, but those moments where, where I love it and I love it in the right way and all of the stars have aligned and I'm driving out and the weather's good and I know the fish are biting and it's just, then it kind of does something in my soul. And that does happen. It just doesn't happen as often, before. Yeah. And that's just a product of me, having a lot going on and having 5 children, from the ages 12 and to 2 and, so you see what I'm saying? Like that makes anything harder. Like that, doesn't matter.
You could be selling vacuum cleaners and make it tougher.
Yeah, that's just that's just life.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love it. It's just harder to love than it used to be.
How's it changed regulation wise in the sense to where do the fishermen get a chance to provide any input? Do you get a chance to provide any engagement like what we experience here, engaging with our Colorado Parks and Wildlife or with the legislature? Is all that stuff done separate from, or can you engage, or is there a community of fishermen that can go sit down and go, no, that's BS. No, we need to do this. No, we need to impose more regulations on ourselves. Is there that up there?
There is, but it's more like there's associations that are engaging with Board of Fish or on the federal level with National Marine Fisheries, who are ultimately making regulatory decisions based on harvestable biomass and real scientific modeling and calculations. So it's not like it's different than here because there's only so much harvestable biomass. It'd be like, it's almost like how we manage, to a certain degree, we manage our elk in the state of Colorado, both to what the landscape could sustain, but some of that is social stuff too, right? I mean, if it's costing CPW $10 million to keep an extra 100 elk in existence because of game damage claims or whatever it is, I mean, there's some flexibility there. Whereas in Alaska, it's like, well, this needs to be harvested or should be harvested, this portion, and that harvestable biomass, there's only it's an how it's broken down into regulation is an allocation issue. Like in the case of king salmon, we get 20 or now 23%, and the trawlers are at 77%. So there's only so much to go around. And depending on how much participation you have in the sport fishing sector, then those regulations are predictive in a certain sense to what, okay, there's this much effort, there's these many charter boats, there's this many people going out and trying to catch king salmon for their freezer and their residents, and they take all that and they say, we want to end up here, here's what we're going to start out with. And with king salmon, we have in-season management, so that could change at any time, like I mentioned. If we see closures, we see them later in the season because it's like, okay.
So they pick up the phone and call you, or they send you an email and say, okay,
you get an
we're
emergency
done?
order that'll say, okay, at midnight on August 1st, we're shutting down king salmon retention or something like that.
And that would be on the commercial side or and the
no,
tourism side?
on the sport fish side.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that puts you in a bind significantly if you've got people booked.
But we only really target king salmon later, but in the first part of the season, that's all we do. So that's our bread and butter. May and June is all king salmon and ground fish and stuff. But so what we prefer regulation wise is the ability to harvest 3 fish annually, 1 a day for non-residents. Mm-hmm. And then later in the season, a lot of us don't really, if it needs to be done, shut her down or later in the year, we have silvers to catch. It's just a much different part of the season with respect to what it is we're doing and what we're targeting. I think you asked me a question and I went off into a different universe.
Well, it's because it's mesmerizing to me because, here you look at, you want to go trout fishing and you take your kid out and you got, a bag limit of 8 and possession limit of, let's just say 20 or whatever it might be. They never have turned around and called you and put an emergency order out and said, stop fishing.
Yeah.
And you don't have the commercial fishery like
right.
you do there. You don't have the subsistence fishery. To me, if I was a subsistence guy, I would be looking at things on the worst possible scenario, that if I'm up on some river somewhere and I had to watch all the trawlers and all the commercial stuff and all the tourism and then all the people doing the stuff on the rivers that are tourism, what do I get left? I mean, it's much broader than that.
And they'll close that stuff down too. That's what I was saying. Like, just because you have, a village of a Yupik village of 400 people that needs that resource doesn't mean that they always, it's just, they can do it anytime they want. They shut it down. It'll come and go. So that's regulated too. It's not unregulated subsistence. It's just they are, in a certain sense, that's the last stop for that resource. When it's swimming out around in the ocean, it could get caught, it could get eaten by any.
So they change the regulations on a quota or harvest every year, and so they let you know in April, but they're determining on last year's catch. Similar to what they might do on big game regulations in the lower 48, where they say, we're going to modify licenses, not so much harvest, but licenses. Up there, they're modifying quotas
Retention.
and catch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those regulations with king salmon are every April. Halibut's different. It's earlier on in the year. There's some meetings that take place with some recommendations, and if those recommendations are accepted, then the regulations typically go into place. I think usually we learn in February what our halibut regulations are. That's on the federal side. So, but it changes yearly. I mean, that's why these regulations that are with king salmon, at least in the sport fish sector, are directly correlated to a lower abundance index, and that changes, right? I mean, it goes up, it comes down. That's not, to a certain extent, that's a normal cycle. That's not to say that, we have a resource that is collapsed, so our regulations are lowered. No, it's normal for it to change. And then on the troll end of things, where these are the highest quality seafood on earth, all hook and line caught. It's that quota is reduced too. So they I don't know, I can't remember what the total quota is for the year. It's a number of fish, but so that what that means for a troller, when they open king salmon on the ocean, it's almost always done July 1st for the first opener. And then they'll try to catch, I think, roughly 70% of the total quota, of their total quota. And then they'll shut it down. That might take, if it's a low quota, it could be as short or as quick as 3, 4, 5 days at most.
Really?
And then they'll shut it down. And then they'll reassess everything and what was actually harvested because, you don't just pitch your fish off and then, it looks like 100. Everything is counted. Sometimes you have state troopers checking to see if there's any fish that are shorts, under 28 inches. You'll have, NOAA enforcement sometimes. It's extremely.
We had to leave a fin on or something on some stuff, bringing it back.
Yeah, that might have been like was it a salmon?
Yeah.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't head them. You have to gut and gill them. You can't. You don't have to, but you can't fillet a salmon on the water.
Oh, you can't.
No.
Halibut, you could.
You can. Oh, that's what it was. So we'd fletch out a halibut, which is like filleting it, and there's 4 fletches, and so we'd fillet it. You can't have more than 4 pieces per halibut. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can't chop those up or anything, and then the skin has to stay on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And was it the same for lingcod too?
Lingcod you can't fillet on the water at all.
You had to bring that in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I literally cannot fillet a lingcod till I am where I'm landing the boat.
And that's for accountability.
Yeah. It's just a state-imposed regulation that, because of size restrictions, and they get a lot of data. That's the thing from harvest. Every day I have creel census, like people who are getting paid, usually seasonal jobs by Fish and Game to. Now I have a logbook, so everything's logged, but they're doing scale samples. They're doing like genetic testing. They're doing, is that lingcod a male or a female? In some cases, they'll scale sample king salmon or silver salmon. Once in a while, you get a hatchery fish, and you can tell because the adipose fin is clipped off. Sometimes those have a serial number in them, so they can tell you where it was released.
It's like a banded duck.
It is, yeah. It could be like that fish came from Oregon at this hatchery in this river system, and was released on this date and so forth. It's pretty cool.
I'll be darned. So is the wildlife management as complicated in Alaska? Is the fishery side of things?
These are hard questions for a dumb fisherman.
Because you still have the subsistence.
Yeah.
You still have there's not a commercial deal to the extent but there's guides and outfitters.
Yeah.
But it's a complex system as well as far as the regulations.
Sure. Yeah. And I was trying to figure out how to answer that because I think I would say, and I'm not a biologist, but I think I would say yes. I mean, it complex in the sense that you're dealing with. I mean, like if you took an ungulate here in the state of Colorado, like an elk or deer, it's complex enough. But take a king salmon in the ocean that just swam from, I don't know, the Fraser River system in Canada or even from California or something, and the amount of what a fish has to go through in the ocean with environmental factors, with predators. I mean, there's not just mountain lions and bears chasing a king salmon. It's like, you name it. I mean, good luck making it to age 5 in the ocean. And so I think in that sense, it has to be much more complex.
Because you got seals and otters
and
walruses and
killer whales and sperm whales. And I mean, you name it. Yeah.
Plus the birds.
The ocean's a wild place. That's for sure. In some industries, like the longline fishing, when you're fishing for blackcod, you're doing it off the continental shelf, and you'll have in Southeast Alaska, the killer whales have not really bothered blackcod fishing, like when they'll take fish from the longline, but the sperm whales will, and like the Moby Dick looking things are super cool, but they're much slower than a killer whale and less efficient. So they'll either, I forgot what the methods are called, but they'll either take the line. They're a toothed whale, the biggest toothed whale on earth, I think. They'll take the ground line as it's coming back up and being hauled, and these are all hooks, right? And they'll floss it so the black cod will go through their mouth and they'll eat black cod, or they'll kind of string it back like a bow and let it go, and it pops off cod, and then they go around and swim, pick them up. And like, I think I wouldn't consider myself a longliner. I've done it, but you'll have, a couple of sperm whales on you while you're hauling. I think could probably take 20-30% of the black cod. What they've done now is almost all boats, including smaller longliners, like 40-foot longliners and stuff, are using pots to fish for black cod. And so the whales, there's not nearly as much whale take. And these are collapsible black pots. They look like a big fish trap, and they kind of collapse down. And then as you're setting gear, I think they come out, they're just baited, and they go out on the ground line instead of a circle hook. So that's helped with predation.
Really?
Yeah.
And you got to worry about any of the mammal predators, what we saw, the sea lions.
Oh yeah.
They'll eat anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have sea lions, will eat your fish, killer whales, sperm whales. The sperm whales though, they're out off the continental shelf. I mean, their primary diet's probably squid, giant squid.
But the continental shelf is the deep trough.
Yeah, it's like the abyss.
Yeah, was it 40,000 feet or 10,000 feet or whatever?
It's deep.
Yeah.
At some point it must be. Initially it goes from like 30, 40, 50 fathoms out to 100, and then it drops off significantly into the 2,000-3,000.
But there's no fish down there to speak of.
Oh yeah,
really?
Yeah,
really.
Black cod and some really cool rockfish like
what were those
short
orange ones we
rakers,
caught?
idiot rockfish. Those are yellow eye rockfish.
Yeah, and you put them
we have zero retention on those, but we release them in a way that they survive. It's we could probably talk another 2 hours about that kind of stuff.
Well, I know it's a kind of interesting conversation. And there again, going to the complexities, I don't think people realize if they go up there for a 3-day fishing excursion, or if they go to Whole Foods and buy salmon out of the meat cooler there, they don't understand the complexities of what it takes to be able to turn around and put that into that deal so you can eat it and be done with it.
Yeah, and it's a perfectly good and healthy thing to support, like wild Alaskan king salmon. It's well managed. It's sustainable. When you're buying it from Whole Foods or King Soopers, if it says Alaskan salmon, it's almost, especially king salmon, is almost always troll caught when you see it at the marketplace. So it's a high quality product. And you're dealing with a user group who's probably one of the only user groups on earth that actually care about the resource. That's what, similar to here, like it's hard for some people to understand that how much I love elk as animals. I eat them and I harvest them. And that connection is very real and authentic. It's the same thing in Alaska. I mean, if you take away the hunter in Colorado, if you take away the commercial fisherman or the sport fisherman in Alaska, you've eliminated what I think is the most powerfully connected, caring connection to the resource. I mean, and that's what a lot of these anti-hunting organizations or movements have. Maybe it's an unintended consequence, but in an effort to take that away, they're actually doing harm to the resource.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And there's animal rights extremists in Alaska for a variety of different things, just like there is down here. We've got 961 species of wildlife. There's probably some sort of an extremist group for about 961 species of wildlife.
Yeah.
It's similar up there because of what they consider to be excessive take.
Actually, the state of Alaska, I believe, or NOAA. I think NOAA got sued, so they just went as far downstream as they could. This group called the Wild Fish Conservancy. It has a nice name,
Mm-hmm.
but what they're trying to do is end harvest. So they attacked the trollers who are, you have 1,000 troll permits, and mostly all in Southeast Alaska. These are people who live, who care about the resource, who, they're not taking because they just want to take. They're taking because they love the resource and they love being a commercial fisherman. Well, the Wild Fish Conservancy filed a lawsuit and tried to get, it's a long story, but basically they attacked the trollers to try and eliminate all troll harvest to king salmon, which would just, it's unthinkable what the consequences of that are actually for the resource. And there was not much merit to what their claim was. It had to do with southern resident killer whale populations and how we were intercepting their food source and a bunch of bogus science, really.
Do you see that the science that is available to us now compared to what it was 20 years ago can only get better for the next 20 years? Or do you think you get to a point where it's almost too much to do legitimate boots on the ground management for so many different things? It almost becomes so complex that the people that you still got to have, it's not like you can do AI harvest. You're not going to turn around and do this robotic deal to go out there and catch fish. There has to be a human component when it comes into the management side of this, and the realization to say, this is where we're at, this is where we need to be, this is how we're going to continue to sustain this. The facts and the data are compiled there, but also the complexities sometimes maybe, and we see this in Colorado and other states, the complexities sometimes override the simplicity of what logic would be. Do you see that coming to fruition at any course up there when you're dealing with the fisheries? Because you have the commercial, you have the subsistence, you have the tourism side of it?
Yeah, maybe. I think that I see what you're getting at, and I think there is a point at which it becomes so increasingly or so like burdensomely over like complex. I think it caps out though, where like if the goal is management and the resilience of any particular resource or multiple resources in harmony with one another, I think as long as that remains the goal, I think that an increase in efficiencies within the scientific process and so forth is only helpful if that is the goal. If the goal is the resource. I don't think I really articulated that, but it's more of just it's kind of a strange statement, really.
Well, it's a complex subject because the ebbs and flows of harvest and climate and the toxicity levels in water, or maybe reproduction rates, or I think you get into the same thing that the average person doesn't realize how much a salmon would have to go through to be able to turn around and go from, like what you say, Washington to Alaska.
Yeah.
But then you look at travesties or tragic instances, catastrophic instances that could happen, whether it's an oil spill, whether it's some sort of volcanic activity, maybe it's some sort of weather conditions that weren't ripe in some capacity. There's so much that can change in this, but it's still cyclical when it comes to the wildlife resources if it's appropriately managed. Whether it's rabbits in New Mexico or salmon in Alaska,
well,
it's not written in stone. It's adaptive.
That's right. It's adaptive. I think that's kind of what I was getting at. Is like, nobody should have anything to fear in terms of like the scientific management process. So, for instance, like as long as our goal is not as long as managers, we don't, or they don't enter into that pursuit with like preconceived notions, then the scientific process will only help us. With salmon, the issue is, and again, disclaimer, I'm not a biologist, I'm just a fisherman, but with a lot of observational, data,
a lot of experience.
But the problem with a salmon resource is not over harvest. At least not since the 1960s. It hasn't been. It's habitat related. And so when you mentioned big king salmon earlier, a lot of those salmon were coming from places that have issues with habitat and dams and spawning grounds and stuff. And so the more we learn about that and how to prop up certain resources, that can only come and be grown out of an environment where what we're trying to do is care for the resource, and that's only done by people who ironically are harvesting it because they have the biggest stake in it. And so, there's a lot of really cool efforts and things being done with respect to dams and habitat, especially a lot of our king salmon come out of Washington, Oregon, Canada. And I don't know, a couple of years back, there was some big proposed bipartisan legislation, actually proposed by I think it was a Republican in Washington or Oregon, because they got a lot of hydropower there. Mm-hmm. And so that issue is, how do we figure out how, I think it was maybe on the Snake, the lower Snake or something. How do we figure out are there improvements and enhancements and things that could be done here to turn some of this stuff around, So, and that's scientific, but backed by and grown out of a group of people who, like, bottom line, like to eat king salmon, want to see eat king salmon around, recognize it as a valuable prey for prey species. All of those things are connected.
Are you happy in your head where Alaska fishery management is now?
I think so. There's boy, that's a loaded question. I'll just say I think so. I think that.
It's not perfect, but considering all the factors that you mentioned, and it's not like you have urban sprawl, but you have more people utilizing it because you got more people on the planet. But in all reality, compared to what the alternatives could be, if you saw the resource not being managed appropriately, you could say that you're satisfied as good as what you could be now.
Yeah, and again, they're dealing with the end product. They're dealing with, here's what we can harvest. How do we do this and make it fit within the parameters and boundaries of different sectors and user groups and native interests. And there's so much there. So yeah, I think that's yes. The big, like I said, the only thing that could be changed moving forward is allocation between, like when I'm just talking about Southeast Alaska salmon fishing and management. But like I said, the allocation is what would open up more harvest on either side. If you increase the allocation on the commercial side, you have more sustainable harvest of that resource on coming out of that sector. And if you up the sport fishing sector, so Alaska has to decide, and I actually will kind of stay out of that fight, but Alaska has, because I have a lot of friends who are trollers. I've done it myself. I have a lot of friends who think that the sport fish allocation should be raised. But to me, it needs to be an Alaskan decision with where they want to see put emphasis on. Do they want to put emphasis on more kind of year-round coastal communities when it comes to the troll fishery, or do they want to put emphasis on tourism and sport fishing with allowing residents, or non-residents rather, to harvest more king salmon annually? Because there's only so many that are going to get harvested, and that number changes each year. But the allocation and how that fish is split up is what has an effect on either sector.
We've got another guest coming in. We're going to have to get ready for, but I'm going to. This is a conversation that I think Sean and I could agree that you could go on at different levels because of what some of our other previous guests have been able to bring on. And so I'm gonna give you a couple teasers here. Are you happy with the way Colorado's wildlife is managed at this point in time, and it's satisfied with the way it is?
That's also a loaded question. Speaking personally or from CRWM's perspective, I'm very happy with what our agency does, but what I'm very disappointed in is the undue, inappropriate influence that is not scientific, that's come from, this governor and other forces within the state and national forces that have focused on how we do things here. Because so the agency, they're doing a wonderful job overall, but what they have to work with and the influences they have that are really weighing heavily on them are tremendous. And in that sense, no, I mean, I'm not impressed.
Well, the reason I bring it to that, because I think it's worthy of a future conversation, and given how things are playing out in Colorado, is an example, a comparison. If Southeast Alaska or Alaska as a whole was managed the way Colorado is at this point in time, because of the gubernatorial administrations, because of the oversight, because of the thumb pushing, or because of the backdoor agreements and compromises and agendas, Alaska resources would not last in the capacity that they are now. And we don't have the commercial side. We don't have the subsistence side. We have an economic component and an individual privilege to be able to harvest game within Colorado Parks and Wildlife. If any of these other locations were managed with this sort of oversight and this sort of manipulation, Alaska and the Canadian provinces and any other location would not be able to survive this sort of manipulation and this sort of agenda-driven oversight.
No, and in some sense, it'd be even more catastrophic than if it happened in a place like that than here, because of the different user groups, that add a great amount.
That's helping to feed the world.
Exactly.
Parts of that, just
and
like
they do.
Just like the crabbing era, anything on the East Coast, any of the other countries. I mean, the oceans provide a tremendous value and benefit. That's why the science needs to play a significant role and benefit. We need to incorporate that same mentality into the state side of things, in my opinion, and they've not been able to do that here, and it's started to be manipulated at other points throughout the state and through some of the Canadian provinces, but mostly in the United States. So I think if we have a future conversation about how to move into the next deal, especially before you go to Alaska, you'll be going at the end of June.
But I'll be up in May too.
Yeah, but if we could do something again just to turn around and try to circle the wagons back, you'll have a pretty good idea on how some of these new restrictions or regulations have been imposed over the course of the next month or two before you leave, before you go up there for the summer. And I'd like to revisit the conversation and try to bring it back to full circle and include what's going on in Arizona and what they're trying to do in Oregon and Washington and how that translates into Nevada that I just came from and what we have going on in New Mexico. And you and I are having a conversation with people on Friday night from people in New Mexico that are under the gun about different things. This is something where it's a broader conversation at a much bigger level.
I look forward to that. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, we got Luke Wiedel, board member, CRWM, and we're going to reopen this conversation at some point in time in the near future and try to put some of the pieces together. Thanks for joining us at Through the Gates.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Through the Gates. For more content like this, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe on all of our channels.